Hello and welcome to another completely pointless Fire Emblem Engage tier list. This time, as I suggested last time, we're going to be looking at the engage attacks. And as with the previous ones that I've done, this is going to be ignoring availability and just looking at the actual effects. So I think I kind of under-explained that last time in the context of the engage skills. It would have been something like, okay, you can pick an engage skill that you have, but you still have to engage to use it or something like that. This would be similar. So it's like you can pick an engage attack, that you want to use, but then you still have to like engage to use it, and you still can only use it once while you're engaged and all that stuff. But like, you can we're not gonna like again say that the earlier one is last just because you only have it for a few chapters. I mean, maybe it'll be last anyway, but not for that reason, if so. All right. So without any further ado, let's start with Marth. So Lodestar Rush, you attack 7 times consecutively at 30% damage with a sword. Dragon units do 9 attacks. The attacks always hit. That's basically true for all the engage attacks. Attacks always hit. Target can't counterattack, cannot inflict critical hits or make follow-up attacks. Like, this is going to be true for like all the engage attacks, but yeah. Backup units get 8 attacks, and mystical units get to attack magically. I actually didn't even know that. So you could like use 11 sword. Well, I guess you could use 11 sword anyway. That's okay, but you don't have to. Well, in any case, yeah. So this one, of the just like single target deal a bunch of damage ones, this is one of the more reliable ones for actually landing kills. Like, as we'll get into later, some of these just don't reliably kill things, or reliably don't kill things, as the case may be, which is annoying. But fortunately, even though you don't double this one, like 7 times 0.3, is 2.1. So in other words, you get 210% damage, even putting aside, whether you're using it on like a backup or mystical or dragon. Well, the mystical part is still the same percentage, but yeah. So you get a little bit more damage than you would if you were doubling, but you get to, you have the guaranteed hits. So it's not like, it's not a huge damage upgrade if you are doubling, obviously, unless you're getting like the 8 or 9 attacks. But it is a damage upgrade, and it is obviously a much bigger damage upgrade if you're not doubling. This is why it, in large part, it feels so useful in the early game when it's hard to double and you go from like, I'm not, anywhere close to being able to kill this enemy to, oh, I can kill this enemy. So yeah. Overall, I'm going to need to see how this plays out, but I'm going to put this in B tier. I've been kind of talking it up, but I'm only putting it in B tier, and that's because of reasons that we'll get to later. I might need to adjust this upwards to A tier, but we'll see. Next up, we have Warp Ragnarok. So you have you move up to 10 tiles, like from wherever you are, and then you can make an attack with specifically the Celica's Ragnarok tome. If you're a dragon unit, you get +1 range with Ragnarok, which Ragnarok's normally 1 to 2 range, it becomes 1 to 3. If you're a cavalry, you get to move 12 spaces instead of 10. If you're flying, you get to move 15 spaces instead of 10. If you're mystical, you get a 20% damage boost. If I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. So this one has the problem that, unlike Lodestar Rush, it does not generally kill enemies. It does very early in the game, and that's sort of when it shines, and then it very quickly stops killing enemies because it doesn't actually boost damage, and because Ragnarok as a tome isn't anything too terribly special. It's got 15 might, which like is good early in the game, and like it does compare favorably to the base might of other tomes, even like higher level tomes, but it can be forged and engraved, and so like you will quickly be able to outpace that damage. Maybe quickly is too strong, but you will, like, certainly by the time you get access to be able to like forge 11 sword or something, you'll be able to out damage that on somebody who can use that. How quickly you can out damage that with a tome, I'm not actually sure, but I think it's quickly enough. And in any case, you can't double. So like even if Ragnarok is a little bit stronger, you can't double with Warp Ragnarok. So like the going from like a, even if your tome is like, I don't know, like 7 might or something, and you get like, okay, it's +8 damage, but like because you're not doubling, it's like, that doesn't really do enough. So yeah, it's unfortunate that you can't use a different tome. It's more unfortunate that you can't double / that this doesn't like account for your inability to double in its damage calculation by like boosting damage the way that like Lodestar Rush does. However, it does have a lot of movement utility, and that is worth something. So like I do think being able to like get a unit into position. So for example, I mean, you don't get to do this much in the actual game because of when the Celica ring is available, but like if you're gonna attack a boss, like one thing you can do is, if you either don't have access to the Micaiah ring or need like, you want one more unit in range for whatever reason, like maybe you need to do like a reposition type thing, or you need to take out an intermediate enemy or something, where like the number of units that you want near the boss is greater than the number of units that you can transport just with like the Micaiah warp or something like that. You can use Warp Ragnarok to get another unit into range because it has this extra mobility attached to it. And then like, so maybe, it's like, oh, I transport these 4 units with my warp. One of them kills an enemy that's like between like the boss and like this group of people, but then like my Celica user just uses Warp Ragnarok to get into range, and then they can still get like Goddess Danced or whatever and be part of like the boss kill that way. And obviously they could potentially do damage like along the way to the boss, or maybe to that enemy that needed to get out of the way, or something like that. So even though it doesn't kill enemies, like the movement utility is nice. But the fact that it doesn't kill enemies is a pretty big knock. The mystical damage boost does help with that, but it's still not really enough. Like you have to be, your single hit damage has to be really high for you to be able to get to the point where 20% increase is going to like get you to a kill when you're not doubling. Especially when you can't forge or engrave the weapon that you're using. So I'm still going to call this B tier, lower than Lodestar Rush for now. I might move it down to C tier, depending on how this shakes out. Next up, we have Override. So you attack all the enemies in a straight line. From like one spot, like you start at one spot, end at another spot. You attack all the foes in between. You have to have like both of those 2 spots open to be able to traverse through. I think you have to be able to traverse all of the intermediate spots. So like, I don't think you could have like a cavalry unit, override through like a square that's occupied by a flyer on a square that only flyers can traverse. I'm not totally sure about that, but I think that's the case. Anyway, I mean, that's not like a big deal, but so yeah, you have to use a sword or a lance. I guess one thing I didn't mention with Lodestar Rush, and that's also relevant here, is that like the weapon limitations are also relevant. Like, you might prefer to use an axe, but you can't. Or tome or something. I don't know, but you can't. So Lodestar Rush got to be sword. Override got to be sword or lance. The bonuses you get, so dragon units increase damage dealt by 20%. Armored units has a 10% chance of inflicting break, which is like 10%, really? Mystical units adds magic over 4 to damage dealt, and key adepts has a 20% chance of inflicting break. Okay. I just want to mention this mystical, like, magic over 4 thing. So, like, yeah, you could on a mystical unit like have like 11 sword, and then you will be able to deal magical damage, or I guess flame lance also. Thing though, magic over 4 is like, even if you have like an absolute crap load of magic, like, that is not going to make up for, again, that this is not doubling, right? Like, let's say you have like 40 magic, you're still only dealing 10 extra damage, which is, I mean, that's a lot of extra damage, but it doesn't, it's not as much as just doubling. Now, granted, this attack targets multiple enemies, so the damage output that you get out of it is generally going to be greater than a single target attack. However, it is also going to really struggle to kill anything after the very early game, because you just need to be doubling to kill enemies in general, even with effective weaponry, which you can use. Like, you can use like Sigurd has the built-in Rider's Bane. You could also use like an actual Rider's Bane, Armor Slayer, whatever, like, but you're still generally not going to actually one-shot enemies with this attack. So that definitely significantly limits the utility. It can, like, there is some utility stuff you can do with it where it's like you inherit Draconic Hex, and then you override and you apply Draconic Hex to a bunch of enemies or something like that. But ultimately, I don't actually think this attack is very good for the most of the game. It doesn't, like, it's in Sigurd's kit, it's flexible because you have so much mobility that you can, get into position to do it pretty easily. But just in terms of the effect of the attack itself, I think it's pretty underwhelming. I think for now I'm still gonna put it in B tier, and I think ahead of Warp Ragnarok, because given, like, Warp Ragnarok does have better utility, but the impact of that is not that high, and like, if you do need to do less than one hit KO damage to some enemies, like, obviously this is going to apply it to more enemies than Warp Ragnarok. Granted, Warp Ragnarok is more likely to, like, Warp Ragnarok is hitting resistance, which does help, but you can use like a forged weapon on this, and like, maybe if you like have like a forged engraved steel great lance, like, maybe you can actually find some places, or like max, I don't know. I feel like even a max forge I can get engraved Rider's Bane is not going to one-shot like enemy paladins. And it's certainly not going to one-shot Great Knights. But Bow Knights, maybe. Mage Knights, it probably can. But like, I don't know. It's still fairly niche. In terms of being able to kill it, like, whatever, like, I think even like a max forge Silver Grey Lance is, with an Ike engraving, is still not going to one-shot a lot of things. Like, again, it can probably do mages, but yeah. But you at least have the flexibility to try to push stuff like that with this, where you don't with Warp Ragnarok. I still think I'd rather have just the ability to like actually delete the one enemy I'm targeting with Float Star Rush, though. But yeah, and in fairness, in the early game, like this can be like a multi-kill thing, which is really nice. Yeah. Okay. So next up, we have quadruple hit. User attacks 4 times consecutively. First strike with the light brand, second with the master lance, third with the killer axe, and fourth with the master bow. Which I don't even, is that even in? That's not even like a weapon that they specify what the. Like, I don't think Leaf. Like, you can actually use this weapon, right? Because I was looking through his engage weapons last time, and I don't remember seeing anything about that. Yeah. Yeah, so it does have stats. It is apparently a 6 might, 14 weight, 65 hit weapon that is a brave weapon, but then the brave effect doesn't do anything when you're using the engage attack, presumably, which is why part of the reason why that's not very good. Okay, so other effects: dragons get 20% damage increased. Covert has a luck percent chance of rewarding the user with 1,000 gold after combat if the target is defeated. Okay. Key adept inflicts break. So yeah, this one sucks. It's like it's a single target attack that doesn't kill enemies. Like it's so first of all, you have the killer axe can't crit. The master lance and the master bow don't get to double. And the light brand means that you like will tend to either you're running this on a physical unit and the light brand will do like nothing, or you're running this on a magical unit and then the other 3 weapons won't do anything. I mean, there are mixed attackers, but generally, like, even then, like, the problem is that they need for like a mixed attacker to work, they generally need to be using a really strong weapon like the radiant bow if they're on the magical side, that like offsets the fact that they will generally not have as high of magic or strength as a unit that's focusing on one of those things. And this is like attack is like the opposite of helping with that, with these like the crappy like master weapons that have such low might. Yeah, this attack is just awful. Like, the only thing it really does is gives you the ability to make an attack that doesn't get counterattacked and does like some damage. Like, if you need some chip damage where you're not getting counterattacked, you can use quadruple hit. But man, is this thing just bad. Definitely bottom tier. Like, it's really impressive how bad it is. All right, next up we've got Blazing Lion. So Blazing Lion attacks, like, you target somebody and then it attacks them and the people like kind of in a T shape to the side of them, so it's like basically diagonally forward, so it's a 3-tile space in a line. It's a sword attack. It creates fire terrain in a 3x3 box, with that line being like the front of the box moving away from the user. The boosts are that for dragon units, it's the attack space is 2x3 rather than 1x3. So of the 3x3 box that it creates flames in, it attacks the first 2 rows rather than the first row. And then for mystical units, the flame terrain is how does this, say? So a 3-tile wide row followed by a 2x5 area. So I think what that's saying, in other words, is that the first 2 rows will be 5 tiles wide instead of 3 tiles wide, and then the last row will still be 3 tiles wide. I don't know if I've even ever seen this, but so this is another one where it will not tend to kill enemies because, again, it doesn't double. But it is a multi-target thing that also has some additional utility in the form of the flame thing. So, like, you know, I kept talking about how this is like, you know, flame dragon vein at home or whatever, and I mean that's like it really is like it has. I mean, you can only use it the one time. It's not as big, but it does, you know, have that same effect of blocking down enemy movement. Also, you get the damage on turn start. I think between like the requirement to use swords and the I mean, you can still, with this one, you know, you can forge, you can engrave, but like, so even like a silver blade isn't really going to do that much damage at the point in the game where you're using that. You know, early in the game, this would, if you had access to it like really early in the game, you would potentially be able to like set up some real like multi-kill stuff. I think, but I mean, although I guess you wouldn't have access to like the higher level engage weapons, which would at that point, like, you know, outshine the weapons you normally would have access to. But yeah, like compared to Override, I think this is generally better just because of like the extra utility that it offers. And it's also like a little easier to get like a group of targets with this that it's going to affect, like, not so much in terms of the damage output. Like 3x1 line is like pretty much strictly more constrained than, you know, like an arbitrary length line. But if you're looking at that 3x3 box of units where you need one person in sort of like the center side, like the of the box, but then like you're putting the fire down in this 3x3 box, and that's going to like affect the units in that box, and also like sort of behind and to the sides potentially in terms of mobility. Like that part of it is more flexible than just attacking in a straight line. You know, so yeah, I think this is better than Override for that reason. It's still not great, but I think it is better. Okay, next up we have Astrostorm. So you strike 5 times consecutively with a bow. Each strike deals 30% of normal damage, and it has a 10-tile range. The other effects are, for dragon units, it's a 15-tile range. For covert units, it's a 20-tile range. For key adept, it inflicts break. So, first of all, this deals 150% damage, which is worse than doubling, but it's not as much worse than doubling as a lot of these other things, which are dealing, you know, like 100% damage, or, you know, like there's like the 120% with the mystical Warp Ragnarok. It's worse than Lodestar Rush in terms of damage output, but it retains damage effectiveness for bows, so it will just absolutely murder flyers, unless they're, you know, they have effective damage negation. 150% damage is still, against some targets, it's still like basically throughout the entire game, it's still achievable to actually one round with 150% damage in a way that it's generally not with 100 and 120. Like, yeah, it's harder, but it's doable. And the massive range is really nice, both just in terms of like the flexibility and also in terms of doing things like baiting out bosses, which is why this is going in A tier. So I think you can forge and engrave with this one. You can you can use like you can use a really good magical weapon with it. So like if you want to deal magic damage, this is a significantly more viable option than some of the other stuff. I mean, the Levin sword is strong, but it's not so strong with like single target, like single hit damage that you're gonna like kill enemies with it with like blazing sword or override or something like that. Flame lance is weaker still, but like radiant bow, that's real that's real big damage. But then you can also just use like a forged silver bow or something like that if you want the physical damage. I mean, it is unfortunate that bows don't have like a smash weapon equivalent, so that does like you don't get the like if you're doing like blazing sword or override, like you can use like a great sword, great lance. You can't do that here, which is a downside. But I think the 50% damage like more than makes up for that, generally speaking. And another minor thing is that Alchrist's Luna can proc on this, and I assume that's also true of like Sandstorm and other proc skills that are in the game. So, because they're not considered like critical hits, and the relevant point here is that they have like 5 chances to proc. Whereas like presumably Luna can proc on like override. Well, that would have more chances to proc as well. Blazing sword, like same thing, I guess. But like this is because it's all on the same enemy. Like it's like that's going to give you like a very good chance to like kill an enemy if you're otherwise close to killing them. And other thing about this is that the way that the math works on this is very generous to the amount of damage, which helps with why this is able to hit like one-shot thresholds where you might not expect it to, because basically it like very aggressively rounds up. So if you like, let's say that you are like, how can I do math on this to make it like simple thing? Okay, let's say that you're doing let's say that your attack is 50. Like well, that's very high for after subtracting defense. Let's say that it's 30. All right, your attack minus the opponent's defense is, or resistance as applicable, is 30. So 30% of 30 is 9. So you're doing 9 times 5. If you increase that attack by 1, just 1, and you go from 30 to 31, you will do 10 times 5 damage. So increasing your attack by 1, like, from like Vale's personal skill or something, will increase the damage output of this by 5. Now, you have to hit that interval for that to be true. So like if you increase it by 2, it will also only go up by 5. So, how impactful that is depends on the exact numbers, but that aggressive rounding does definitely help the damage output significantly, because if it didn't work that way, if you had to get to like 9.5 or all the way to 10, then that would be like to get to let's see. To get to 10, you'd have to increase. Well, it doesn't matter. I mean, you'd have to increase it a bunch more anyway. Yeah. So hopefully that was clear. If it wasn't clear, just like know that it has a tendency to do a little bit more damage than it seems like it should. But yeah, so between like the damage output and the utility, I think this one is fantastic, and I'm putting it in A tier. You can probably guess why I'm only putting it in A tier, not S tier, but we'll get there. We will get there. All right. So next up, we have Twin Strike. So you strike twice consecutively. The first strike uses a sword of your choice, and the second strike uses Siegmund. Deals bonus damage to corrupted units. Siegmund in Engage is a 12 might lance with sorry. It is a lance, right? It just has a sword icon for some reason. Oh, maybe this is just indicating that it doesn't have an icon at all. Yeah, that could be what it is. All right. Because it's definitely a lance. It shows it as much. Anyway, it's a. I think did I just say 12? It's a 13 might lance, which deals bonus damage to corrupted, which I mean is kind of redundant in the context of this, but anyway, since both hits deal bonus damage to corrupted. So okay, this is not, generally speaking, as good as just doubling because you are locked to using Siegmund for the second attack. But it does at least mean that you get to do something close to doubling. So purely from a damage output standpoint and ignoring the effective damage, it is already generally doing better than some of these other skills, with the caveat that, as I've mentioned in my previous video, because the Erica ring has a magic boost, you're going to maybe want to put this on a magical unit, and then they have to use a sword, which means like at best they can use the Levin sword, which is not really ideal compared to something like, again, like a silver blade or whatever. Although if we're evaluating this kind of in a vacuum, then we could say, well, if you just generally had access to Twin Strike, then you can put it on a unit that like wants to use a sword anyway, and or at least it has physical damage anyway, and blah blah blah. So that's all that complication, but the bonus damage to corrupted is really, really nice. There's a lot of corrupted, particularly in the late game. There's also a lot of corrupted in the early game that if you had access to this, it would be very useful. The ability in particular to just delete corrupted worms is something that, even though Rosado can't actually do it in his join chapter, like, what the heck, Rosado, come on, get it together. But like, the ability in general with like a good unit to use this to just delete a worm is something that like not a lot of characters can replicate, and especially can't replicate easily. It takes like and the like having to take a counterattack from those things is very unfortunate because they ignore your defenses. So there are other ways of dealing with them, to be sure, but it is nice to just have this like button that just deletes them, and you don't have to worry about like any other like setup or whatever to like get that done. You're not like, oh, I need to like use fracture to break them. Oh, I need to like have what's it called, the lens skill, alacrity. I don't have to worry about relying on a crit, having to use like a brave weapon that might not be very good for enemy phase. I mean, I guess potentially your silver blade or whatever isn't going to be very good for enemy phase either, but whatever. Point is, it's nice to have this delete button for those, but it's also nice to have a delete button for just like generally strong corrupted enemies, of which, like I said, there are quite a lot in the late game, and there are also in the early game. Like, if you had access to this, it'd be good then too. It also like you can um uh you know um what's I gonna say? Yeah, I lost my train of thought. But in any case, so yeah, I think this one is good. I think it is of like the sort of just do some damage skills. I think it is the best one. I do think it is like a noticeable step down from Astrostorm, so I'm only going to put it in B. But yeah, I do think it's the corrupted targeting. I think puts it ahead of Lodestar Rush, um, because like even though it's a little bit worse at killing non-corrupted enemies than Lodestar Rush, I think that the value that Lodestar Rush is offering in terms of being able to do that is like the marginal impact of that is smaller than like, you know, Twin Strike being able to like, well, you know, I can probably kill other enemies, but then if it's a corrupted, I can definitely kill it. um yeah. Okay, so next up we have Great Ether. So, you activate this, you get +5 defense, +5 res. You can't counterattack. You can't be danced. At the start of the next turn, you attack all foes within a 2-tile radius with like whatever sword or axe you used, and you restore damage dealt times 0.3 HP. So this one, like again has the problem where it's like you can deal a bunch of damage with it, but you won't tend to kill enemies. It is like of the big AoE attacks, I think it is the most likely to be able to kill enemies, um, because it you can use it on an arbitrary axe, which means you can like you can use a poleaxe. You can use a hammer. That's probably not going to kill armored units. Armored units are just like too bulky. But you can also use like a forged like steel silver great axe, and that is like if there's anything that's going to be able to kill like enemies without effective damage, from full health in one hit, that's going to be it. Which I mean, it probably isn't in the general case, but at least you got a chance. The problem though is that it can be very difficult to actually like get into position to do this. You can't just like walk up to a group of enemies and hit the button and then they take damage. You've got to like make sure that they actually like cluster around you on enemy phase, which means they have to target you and not something else. And that's just, not only is it like can it be unreliable if you want to have other units nearby, it's also just slower. Like you basically have to wait a turn. Like if you think about it, like, okay, in terms of like, okay, I need to like, if you're routing a map and this is like the last thing that you do, then yeah, if ending on enemy phase rather than player phase doesn't really matter. But like, if it's like I need to move through this group of enemies, I need them to die, you have to wait an extra player phase before they actually die. So yeah, it's like it can be good for baiting in a way that some of these other ones are not, because it's enemy phase based. So like you don't necessarily need to advance all the way to where the enemies are. You can advance like to somewhere near the edge of their range and then pull them towards you. So that is nice. And the increased bulk that you get from activating this like also helps with that. But yeah, it's definitely finicky. So I think I think this loses out on utility to Roy's Blazing Lion. The fire tiles I do think are nice, but I do think this is well. This spends a lot of time in the game being better than Override, but not that much better. And Override's, well, would Override be better in the early game than this? Maybe not. It's hard to say. Hard to say. This definitely goes either above or below, directly above or directly below Override, but not entirely sure about that one. I'm gonna say below, but I'm not super confident with that. All right. Next up, we have Great Sacrifice. So, Great Sacrifice restores fully restores HP to all allies, reduces the user's HP to 1. For dragons, it reduces the user's HP to 30% of the current value. For armored units, it gives all the allies +1 defense for their next round of combat. So not like, for the turn, just for the round. It's very specific. And for key adepts, it also cures status effects. So I don't think this is very good for its effects. I think it's mostly just an XP button. And it is nice to be able to get the XP, but at the same time, like, the kind of unit that you're going to want to probably put this on is not a unit that's probably, like, it's probably that important to get that XP onto them. So I think I'm actually going to put this in C tier, but above quadruple hit, because quadruple hit is garbage. But, like, if it's like, if I want to get XP on a unit, just give them, like, access to Mercurius or Parthia, and then they can kill things. This is not really what I want to be doing with the unit that I, like, care about leveling up. I mean, it is, like, it's nice, for, like, the Jeans of the world that are underleveled and need to catch up. But I don't value that very much. That's more like something that makes those units less bad. But still, it's like not very impressive. All right, next up we have All for One. All allies within a 2-tile radius of the user make chain attacks against the target, and then the user attacks with the selected sword. The dragon effect is that it sets the hit rate of the chain attacks to 100%, and backups it's a 3-tile radius rather than a 2-tile radius. So I mean, it's worth noting with the backup thing that it's like, yeah, but are you gonna put Lucina on your backup unit? What? Probably not. Like, if you care about chain attacks, that's not really where you want your dual assist to live, because, like, they've already got the ability to chain attack. They don't have the ability to do a dual assist level chain attack, but you'd probably rather put that on a unit that can't normally chain attack at all. But anyway, this one's bad. Like, so you don't get to double, you get to make, like, a regular sword attack. So that's already starting off, like, not impressive. And then the chain attack thing is just, it's so much effort to set up, and the payoff is so underwhelming. Like, you're gonna spend for each action that you take with some ally to get them into range of this, you get, like, a damage boost of 80% of 10% of the, or in other words, 8% of the enemy's HP. Like, wow. So much damage. Ooh, like, yeah, of course, sometimes they're going to be there anyway, but, like, how many of those chain attacks do you need to fire off to offset just, like, doubling the enemy? like just like, let's assume for the sake of argument that you can, if you can do, like, okay, you're like, I can't kill them because I don't do 50% times 2. Now maybe you can't kill them because you don't double. Like, so maybe you do 50% damage. Let's go with that. Like, is that'll be easier. It's like, how many 8, like, how many chain attacks are you going to need to, like, expect to be able to kill the enemy? Well, that's 8% into 50%. So 6, sorry, 7. Yeah, 7 chain attacks. You're expecting to need 7 chain attacks to offset the fact that you're not doubling. That's like a lot of chain attacks. You can have a maximum of 12 people within a 2-tile radius if you, except one of them is going to be the enemy that you're attacking. This is like the 4 spaces immediately next to you, and then the ring around that is another 8. But like that's an incredibly, like, dense thing that you need to do, like, to put like, so basically 7 units within the 11 tiles, that, like, possible tiles within 2 squares, like, just to get to the point where you're doubling, you're matching the damage output from doubling. If you're like, it is like, of course, also possible that you're doubling but you're not one rounding because you're short on damage. But in that situation, the problem is even worse, because, like, if you're like, oh, I'm doing like 40 or 45% of their HP per hit, so doubling doesn't quite kill, well, now you need even more chain attacks to make up the loss of the double attack, because the single hit damage is only like 40 or 45% or whatever. Now, granted, you can offset that with something like a forge, so you can have your forged silver blade or whatever, but, like, even so, like, you're still, maybe now you only need like 4 or 5 chain attacks or something like that. And I'm talking about the number that, like, not the number that need to hit, but the number that you expect to need to like to have, where, like, your expected damage output is enough to kill. And of course, it's not going to be reliable unless, I guess, you're a dragon. But yeah, it's just, like, really, really, really underwhelming. And, like, Lucina gives you a speed boost. Like, you're probably going to double, like on, with your Lucina user. So just do that. Anyway, this is better than quadruple hit, I guess. Is it even? Like, I mean, okay, no, it definitely is better than quadruple hit. Like, I was falling into like how do I actually use this, like, thought process where I'm like, well, I use quadruple hit more, but that's because the people that I have the leaf emblem on tend to have worse damage output. But, like, like, abstracting that away, like, I do think that, like, this is a better attack than quadruple hit, but it's bad. Okay. Next up, we have Torrential Roar. So you attack everyone within a 3-tile long line in front of the user with Dragon Fang, and then it creates water tiles for all of those tiles. And then Dragon Fang is a 20 might weapon, physical weapon. Again, this is something where it's single hit damage, so you're not doubling, so you're not killing things. 20 might weapon is better than Warp Ragnarok. It's better than, most weapons can be without being like a forged smash weapon or something like that. So as far as single target damage goes, it is well up there. Um, well, the single target damage that doesn't get to choose its weapon, I guess. Um, the it's still going to get outpaced by the cases where you can actually control the weapon. I mean, eventually, right? In the early game, as with Warp Ragnarok, like this will be stronger than anything you can do with like, you know, just selecting a weapon. But later in the game, it won't. The thing that makes this awkward, and it's similar to Twin Strike in this respect, is that again, Corn gives a magic boost, and not only that, but I mean, this is not what I've done, but you know, a lot of people swear by the mystical fire dragon vein. Well, yeah, and then you're using a mystical unit, like they're probably not going to do much damage with torrential roar. The If you do put it on a physical unit, you know it will do respectable damage. It's still not going to generally kill things. The other thing about this is that while it does apply Draconic Hex and Draconic Aura, that the value of those is coming from those skills. Like that's like a kit thing. It's not really an attribute of Torrential Roar itself. The attribute of Torrential Roar itself is to put down the water tiles. That does increase your ability to hit the enemies because it provides an avoid debuff. But it doesn't really do much else. Like it doesn't really offer like much crowd control because being on the water tile doesn't decrease their movement. And if they need to move through the water tiles, then that will, but it's just this like one line, so all they have to do is move one tile to the side and they can get around it, and they'd probably have to do that anyway because like the person who put down the water tiles is still standing there in their way anyway, so that you know if they're gonna go around them. So yeah, the utility of this is mostly the utility value of Corrin's other skills, not of Torrential Roar itself. Except insofar as, well, Torrential Roar gives you a way to apply those skills with AoE. Which is, I mean, there is like definitely like a synergy there, but in the context of this tier list, I'm reluctant to give that much credit. I mean, you can inherit Draconic Hex and apply that, you know, in an AoE fashion, with the other AoE engage skills or engage attacks. You can't do it with Draconic or with Dreadful Aura. So that is like something that is Corrin unique. But you know, if you were sort of like taking this, you know, and just being able to use it with another ring or without a ring or however that would work, like you wouldn't have Dreadful Aura. So overall, now and then of course, you know, there is like in terms of actual damage output, obviously it's going to compare unfavorably to Override, because except for like maybe very early in the game, because Override, you know, will always be able, well, that's not strictly true. If you have a unit that's like right in front of you and then another unit that's 2 squares behind them, then this can target both of them and Override can't. Generally speaking, Override is going to be able to target at least as many enemies, if not more, and Override also has access to like forges and stuff. So Override is generally going to be able to do more damage, but not like a lot more damage. 20 might is good. It's hard to find more than 3 enemies in a line. So I think with like putting that all together, I think I'm inclined to say that this goes here, because I think you're going to spend more of the game where this can do more damage with Override. I mean, than Override, like, obviously not if you account for Corrin's actual availability, but like if you had access to Corrin as early as you have access to Sigurd, then like it would certainly be doing more damage at that point in the game. And like the fact that you don't need the enemies, you know, like that you can hit 2 enemies without them being next to each other is useful. Like the Water Dragon Vein is useful. Like you apply that debuff to a boss or something that's hard to hit, and that has value. So I think this ends up coming out a little bit ahead there. I could see the argument for the other way around, though. Yeah. But I think Blazing Lion, the utility of Blazing Lion with the fire tiles is better still, and it's easier to hit more targets. So even though it's going to do less damage for a good chunk of the game, like because you're generally not killing with any of them, like hitting more enemies is probably like the more impactful thing there. All right, next up we have the Goddess Dance. So this refreshes all adjacent allies, allowing them to act again if they have already acted, and it also provides a stat boost based on your class. Dragons give plus 3 to all stats, backups give plus 4 strength, cavalry give plus 10 dexterity. This is all the same as Instruct, so covert plus 5 speed, armor plus 5 defense, flying plus 5 res, mystical plus 4 magic, key adept plus 10 luck wall. This, yeah, S tier. This is why I set this up the way that I did, because I knew I was like putting this up here. Like it's just like stupid good. Like so good. Like, oh my god, absolutely bonkers, amazing good. The fact that it gives you a stat boost is just like so egregious. Like on top of the refresh thing, like it didn't need to do that. It would have still been the best one. It would have still been the only S tier one if it didn't do that. But it does. Like it's so ridiculous. So yeah, that it's just like crazy good. And I don't think I really need to explain why. But yeah. Finally, we have Dragon / Bond Blast. This one, oh man, and there's a lot to run through in terms of what this actually does. So it strikes twice consecutively. This is Dragon Blast. Strikes twice consecutively. The first strike uses the selected sword. The second uses a magical beam with 20 might. So that's pretty similar to Twin Strike, right? Twin Strike also uses a sword, also has a secondary attack that you don't control the might on. This one, the magical beam, has more might than Siegmund, but it is magical. So like, if you're using a physical unit, then it's probably going to do less damage. It also doesn't have the corrupted effectiveness. You can choose the sword just like you can with Twin Strike. The dragon effect for this is that it increases damage dealt by 20%. The backup effect is it adds strength over 4 to damage dealt by the sword attack. The mystical effect is the same thing, but it's magic over 4. Key adept inflicts break. And then there's also Bond Blast. Where, and maybe I should have put this in like as a separate thing, but I didn't think to do that. So Bond Blast struck 3 times consecutively. The first strike comes from the user's engaged partner using Lyration, which is the Allir engaged sword that has 15 might. The second strike comes from the user with their selected sword, and the third strike uses the magical beam with 20 might, and the sum of both units' magic stats. So compared to Dragon Blast, this is striking an extra time with Lyration, and the magical beam is getting boosted by the magic stats of the 2 units. But this does require that both units be adjacent to each other. It still only uses the action of one of the 2 of them, but they do have to be adjacent. And then dragon units increase the damage of all of this by 20%. And then backup and mystical units like increase the sword attack the same way that they did with Dragon Blast, and key adepts inflict break. Okay. So, I think like yeah, you know what? Okay, hold on. I'm just going to pause this for a second and add in the Bond Blast icon, because I think I do need to try to distinguish the two of these. Okay, now we've got the Bond Blast icon. So, Dragon Blast, I think is worse than Twin Strike, because of like it doesn't have the corrupted effectiveness, and because it's kind of mixed, like a mixed attack, like the sword and the magic beam. I mean, you can use 11 sword, but like again, that does like kind of limit you compared to being able to use something like a silver blade. And for similar reasons, I think it's probably worse than Lodestar Rush. But it's probably better than Blazing Lion because it's more likely to just kill a thing. So I'm gonna put this here. It's yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe there's a scenario where, you know, your magical attack is high enough that you like you can make that work with 11 sword, and you can like, you know, one shot enemies that you wouldn't otherwise be able to kill, but like with some frequency. I mean, but I think probably like Lodestar Rush is going to be better from that perspective. I mean, I guess yeah, like Lodestar Rush early in the game, I think this would just like delete stuff pretty comfortably. So you know, I think they're pretty comparable in that way. And then Bond Blast, the need to be next to the engaged partner definitely is a major limitation. So like, you know, the natural place to use this against the final boss. The final boss is like this like 5x5 tile monstrosity. It's very easy to be adjacent and still like hit them, but normally, like outside of that situation, you're probably not going to be able to set that up so easily unless you have canter or a ranged weapon on the other unit. And the other thing is that like you have this on like 2 units, and so in theory you can use it on both of them, but like, you know, you have to have like somebody be adjacent before they use it, like, or in a position to be adjacent to the other one, that is. So it's like, it would be, I think, pretty fiddly. On the other hand, the damage dealt with this, like, so you have 3 attacks, so it's just sort of baseline. Roughly, you're doing 300% of your single hit damage. It's not actually that because of all of the caveats around like the weapons and all that stuff. But like roughly speaking, right? Very roughly speaking, you're doing 300% damage, which is already better than just doubling. Maybe it actually isn't, because maybe, you know, the magic attack isn't doing very much damage. Maybe the Lyration attack isn't doing very much damage. Like, you know, depending on stats and what weapons you're using for the sword attack and so on. But it like, yeah, it's the baseline damage for this is pretty good, and it would be very good in the early game. And like a thing that you could do with this in the early game, if you could use it, is that you could like just walk up some unit that's like not just going to do any damage, like Fram or whatever, and like, you know, you you engage plus with Fram, and then you do the Bond Blast, and like, well, that's gonna destroy whatever, and like, who cares that Fram didn't get to attack? Like, that doesn't matter. So like, yeah, I do think this would actually be very, very strong in the early game, like noticeably stronger than Twin Strike and well, although Twin Strike, I mean, you do fight a lot of Corrupted in the early game, so I mean, but then again, the bosses will probably have effective damage negation, or maybe they don't because you don't have access to it, so they don't need to. But yeah, either way, this will probably do at least as well as that, and then it'll do better against non-corrupted enemies. So, like, I definitely think it would like be very strong in that context. As you go later in the game, it's going to be less and less the case that you're going to want to have just like some other unit around that just to be able to do Bond Blast, like, both because like, how are you getting this extra unit into position in time, and like, don't they have other things that they need to be doing? So like, that's definitely a relevant limitation, but like, if you think about, the sort of one turn kill stuff, like, you could definitely do something where you like you set up you have Canter on your Bond Blast users, and like, one of them goes in and like hits the boss, and maybe they don't even take off a health bar, maybe they just do some chip damage, but whatever. They canter, or maybe they use a ranged weapon, maybe they canter back a space, whatever. So now they're like, diagonally adjacent to the boss. Then your Bond Blast user walks up, they use Bond Blast, like, do a crap load of damage, and then they canter into position for a Goddess Dance. And now, like, they're in position to let the other one use Bond Blast after the Goddess Dance, because they've like cantered back like a square and into, so like they're diagonally adjacent to each other, and there's a space that's next adjacent to both of them and also adjacent to the boss that the other one moves into, and then does the Bond Blast. And so like, you could definitely like set that kind of thing up, and I think it would probably allow you to like take units who wouldn't otherwise be able to take a health bar off, and then they would be able to take a health bar off, because even though like, the way that the damage is distributed on this is sort of wonky and like probably not like super optimized for whatever you're doing, it's just like enough damage that like a unit that's like strong enough to like deal good damage but isn't necessarily going to be able to take a health bar off, now they can take a health bar off. So yeah, I think this would be good in that context. Better than Twin Strike? Maybe not. Better than Lodestar Rush? Probably. I think I'm going to go like that. Yeah, I think that's I could see it being better than Twin Strike. I just think the corrupted effectiveness in the late game is like really nice, and that the fact that Bond Blast would be more like finicky to set up like does need to knock it down a little bit. So the only other thing to consider is whether I want to move anything out of this giant B tier, but I don't think I do. Like, I think this sort of reflects the reality and the way that I actually feel about engage attacks in general, which is they're actually not that good. They're, after the early game at least, they're good in the early game, and then they kind of stop being good, and you just want to double things. Like, Goddess Dance is amazing, of course. Astrostorm is really good, and then the rest of them, it's like, well, yeah, it's fine, but like, the thing about, like, even I was talking about, like, it's really nice to have that damage on Twin Strike, but like, the reason it's good is mostly because it lets you take a unit that wouldn't otherwise kill and turn them into a unit that would kill, which most of the other ones can't even do, right? Like, if you weren't killing without Lodestar Rush. You're probably not killing with Lodestar Rush either. But like, that's like it is better. The better thing than Twin Strike is to just be able to kill the units normally, because then you can do it more than just like once every, like once a map or / once however many turns. So like, which is why, even though I keep saying like, it is, the corruptive effectiveness is good, and it is good, it's still not actually that good in like the overall like context of like, how much is this allowing me to do in terms of like, completing objectives, completing maps, whatever, like compared to just having a good unit. It's not really doing that much. It's letting me take a unit that's not as good and turn them into like what amounts to a good unit, like to an extent, but not that much of an extent, because you still only get the one like attack in with it. And that's really the problem with like, or that's not, I shouldn't say that's the problem with these, but like the problem with a lot of the other ones is they don't even do that much. Yeah, like if anything, I could see the argument for, I guess, making another tier that like ends after Dragon Blast. Like, yeah, maybe that is the way to go. Say like, add a row above and call this C and D, and then do this, and then I need to fix the colors if we're doing this. Okay, so yeah, maybe that's more accurate, because like these are at least, the B tier ones are at least like more throughout the game going to remain actually delete buttons, and then in the C tier you have the stuff that just doesn't. But yeah, I guess, yeah, so my overall feeling about this, I think this reflects my overall feeling, which is that most engage attacks are just not actually that good for most of the game. Like, they are good in the early game. They help you overcome the fact that your units just aren't very good in the early game, but then like as the game goes on, like your good units don't really need engage attacks to do stuff for the most part. Astra Storm is an exception. Twin Strike is a bit of an exception. Obviously, the Goddess Dance is amazing. It's not really an attack, but it's classified that way. But it's, that's like, outside of that, it's like they're all just kind of like, whatever. I don't really need to use this. So yeah, that's engage attacks. And thanks for watching. And I've said this before and ended up doing more of these, but I don't have any specific plans to do any more of these. I'm not sure what I would do at this point. But hopefully by the time this goes up, it won't be too long after that I will begin my bracelet only playthrough. So at the very least, you can look forward to that. In the meantime, thanks for watching.